Welcome back to the Warcraft news. We have a lot to talk about today. Blizzard made a critical slip-up in the alpha files, and it's one that reveals exactly when pre-patch hits and when your favorite add-ons will stop working. The beta has also been confirmed, it's sooner than you'd think, and over in housing, there's been a lot. It nearly had its first major controversy just before it launched, though there's one thing that does have people spooked. Also, 2 new Paladin races got leaked, and Midnight's first patch does look like it's going straight back to the Burning Crusade playbook. And then the small topic of WoW technically coming to consoles, though not in the way the headlines are claiming. Okay, if code has ever piqued your interest, I've got something for you. You see, most coding courses are absolute bollocks. Between lectures, textbooks, not that much structure, it ends up being a nightmare. And that's why today's sponsor, boot.dev/Bellular, are actually different. They built something different specifically for gamers. Now, their founder, Lane, reached out to me years ago because he's a WoW player, and since then, well, he's now got 750,000 students completing 33.7 million lessons. Pretty damn awesome. And I know why. For a bit of context, I've got a BEng computer science, and I can say that Boot teaches these concepts incalculably better. Now, specifically, they teach back-end development. That's the kind of role that's basically you building how things actually work with servers and clients. You can land 100k plus jobs, and with Boot, you're taught through a proper 12-month paced program that is structured like a role-playing game. So you've got your leaderboards, your achievements, boss fights, loads of features. And in terms of skills, well, you'll learn TypeScript, which I think is massive and it's a new addition to them. You'll learn Go, you'll learn Python, and you'll do this from the fundamentals through to building real projects and things that could go in your portfolio. It's not some learn to code in 2 weeks scam that just floods the market with vibe coders. It's actually teaching the fundamentals that separate professional developers from people shipping slop, which none of us want to do. Now, you can get started with 25% off your first purchase at boot.dev/Bellular. The way to save the most is to do that with the annual plan, and of course, if you're not happy, they will refund you on the spot. Somewhere in the alpha files, there's a what's new screen, which is of course normal, but what's not normal is that Blizzard made a slip-up, and it's one that tells us the exact date of the pre-patch event. Basically, here it is. Twilight Ascension starts January 27th, and it's going to be an attack from the Twilight's Hammer cult. Basically, Xal'atath's little boys. Now, the last time Blizzard put a date in a What's New window, it was because the patch went live before that date actually came to pass, which makes a lot of sense because it's the date for the event. Now, usually these events start 1 week after the patch drops, so that would basically mean we'd have 1 week of 12.0 to get used to the changes, and then the event would begin. So, our current bet then is January 20th for the pre-patch of Midnight. And that's kind of critical. That is your hard deadline. And it's also the day where everything that can't work in Midnight's new add-on system will die. We'll get more into that shortly. Now, this also gives us a massive hint for Midnight's release date. This is the exciting bit. So, Datamine calendar events ran from January 27th to March 9th. March 9th is a Monday. So if the 27th is the beginning of the pre-patch event, then obviously the date of that event's ending will be the expansion release date, which means Tuesday, March 10th. That's when it's going to happen. But that's not the only date we've got, because there's also the beta, and we did make a guess of that. We were off in our guess. We thought it was going to be this week, but instead it's actually going to be next week, November the 11th. So if you get lucky with an opt-in, or if you pre-purchase the Epic Edition, then I suppose we will see you at the training dummies trying to work out how our classes actually play. But that's still not the final date to cover, because patch 11.2.7 will be on December 2nd. That's where we get housing and the Brawlers Guild, as well as a bunch of narrative content, and that basically will tide us over until pre-patch on January 20th. So, if you want to say goodbye to your lovely combat add-ons, then you've got till then, and you may be saying goodbye to more than you currently imagine. Here's the huge news for add-ons. Last week, we learned about another add-on that's not making the transition, and it's one of the biggest, because it's ElvUI. And with that, people are starting to realize something, to really feel it, and that is that the add-on apocalypse is actually bigger than we thought, certainly bigger than we thought months ago. Ultimately, Blizzard's end goal is to keep some, or like most of the customization that people like from an aesthetic perspective, but it's to kill everything that provides a gameplay advantage. And to do that on a technical level, they've had to tear out most add-on functionality. They've had to change a lot of stuff with how the game works. Now, their efforts to restore some of this stuff have been going okay, but not exactly perfectly. And if you want to see what add-ons can do in Midnight, well, we can take a look at one that actually works. It's called Platinator. And here's its available options. You can see the good news. There's loads of options. But if you look closely, you'll notice that there's absolutely nothing conditional, right? No conditional logic. They're all just basic visual changes. You know, changing colors, moving where things are. Though there are a few neat things it can do, like only showing the first or last word in something. But ultimately, it does prove Blizzard are sticking with their new vision for the game. So because of all this, ElvUI decided to throw in the towel. Development is now officially on hold, and that's basically their way, I think, of saying that they'd love to continue, but they can't. And it's not that they simply don't want to rewrite their add-on, it's that they simply can't make anything worth using or worth making from their perspective. Now, we've got to go into a few more technical things here, because OUF is a framework that ElvUI uses for its nameplates and its unit frames, and they released a fairly damning statement. Here's the most important part of it. Quote, "All in all, it's not about the time and effort. We simply don't have the tools to do the things we want to do. And ultimately, when it comes to frames and nameplates, add-ons can't do anything that the Midnight UI can't. In most cases, they can do less." So that's not a great look for Blizzard's whole customization is fine angle. I think there are some customizations that people would want that wouldn't be a huge gameplay advantage, but that they can't right now. Anyway, going back to Elv, their talk is, at least for now, just talk. Things could actually change, but at least right now, Blizzard's efforts have not been enough for ElvUI to survive the transition. And yeah, I mean, look, change comes at a cost. Saying goodbye to ElvUI after years and years, because I know it's been so many people's default for a long time, that is going to sting. But Blizzard are betting that it's worth it. And at least personally, I did find I started to enjoy WoW a little bit more whenever I was using add-ons that actually felt like WoW. Though for popular add-ons, this is hardly the end of the story. Plater and Details have not made official stances yet, so some familiar add-ons may survive, albeit in a rather neutered form. It's basically just up to the devs if they want to suffer through the rewrites that would be required. So, January 20th then. That is when it'll be time to get your no add-on setup ready, and don't worry, we'll be here to help you with that. Okay, time for 2 housing dramas. So on Alpha, people noticed that housing budgets were massively nerfed. And by that, I mean the amount of rooms and decorations you could have. They were basically way, way lower than we had previously seen. And because of that, people started to ring the death knell that Blizzard had pulled the rug and that now housing is dead. Which was obviously a little bit of an overreaction. We know that housing will have progression with the neighborhood endeavors, and that will actually increase your budget, but still, people were worried, and I get the worries. Maybe Blizzard in the initial testing set the bar high. Maybe they realized that after their PTR test that, well, the servers couldn't handle the crazy complexity, and maybe then they pulled it back. That's the genuine fear that people have had that does actually make sense. But the good news is that it didn't take Blizzard long to respond, and they've actually buffed the hell out of the housing limits. Now, they still do scale rather intensely with housing levels, so it'll start off low, but thankfully with this new scaling, it will get way higher. And hopefully that'll keep the servers safe so that we can actually just go mad customizing. Of course, not that servers will be safe anyway, because last week's PTR housing test revealed major realm instability. Nothing was working as intended. So very much the usual for a PTR stress test. I would say that's good news, and it should mean that the actual system works fairly well when it comes out, assuming that they've got enough time to fix up whatever issues they found. Now, there is some more good news with housing before we get into the next dramatic thing. So, the other improvements then. Decor costs have gone down, you'll require less warfront farming, which I know nobody would be really excited about. And also, skybox rooms are in. These are absolutely incredible. I think they'll enable really cool things, just gorgeous designs. I really wish people doing cool stuff with the skybox rooms was the main talk of the town for this, but it's obviously not. Because another thing happened. There's one more housing discovery that's actually got people even more concerned at the budget nerfs, and it's this. It is Hearthsteel and its associated store icons. This obviously has spooked people, and if you're familiar with how other games monetize housing, well, you know exactly where this could go. Now, the worst possible read is that this would be a full paid currency hellscape for housing, where really there'd be big exclusive items designed for whales. I mean, we know how much money people spent on the likes of, say, the auction house Brutosaur. Now, there is a more charitable read. maybe it's the more likely one, and it is that this could just be a second form of Trader's Tender. That's because Trader's Tender actually is a Battle.net store currency technically, and if this was to work the same way, then, well, these are the files that we would see. And of course, the trading post has been a pretty good success for Blizzard, but the economy there is rather tight, so if they wanted to do another currency to handle all of their housing stuff, then yeah, I think that would make plenty of sense. So perhaps what they'll do is just attach decor items to, vendors and stuff, maybe the Endeavors, and perhaps we will earn and spend Hearthsteel. And as for the shop icons, well, those could be bonuses for shop bundles, maybe things like the 6-month sub or expansion pre-orders, that kind of thing. So ultimately, I would say there is something to fear. This could go really bad if it turned into a big price gouging whale thing, but it is very possible that it's something entirely typical and not an extra upcharge. So if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed how Blizzard have been cagey about new class and race combinations. They were asked about this a lot at Gamescom, and their responses were all very just wait and see. Well, the good news is, well, we've waited and now we can actually see, because the most recent alpha build has got 2 very curious spells in the database. They are the Star-Cursed Voidstrider and Waycrest Griffin. Basically, they're the racial mounts for Void Elves and Kultirans. But take a look at their descriptions, because their descriptions are just the description for the Divine Steed, which of course is the Paladin mount. And for each Paladin race, they have their racial Paladin mount that is one of their own racial mounts. So with this being found in the game files, it seems kind of safe to say that Void Elf and Kultiran Paladins will be coming in Midnight. Now, of course, Void Elves does make a lot of sense. They're already becoming demon hunters, and this whole expansion is about light and void. The Kultirans also do make sense, though, but with an even more specific reason. You see, there's a named Kultiran Paladin that we encounter in the story, so it's probably a tie-in to him. And now, that just leaves Night Elves, who of course are not yet Paladins. Or, to be more accurate, are not player Paladins. I say that because Delas Moonfang has been in the game for at least 10 years now. Who knows, maybe after another 10, Night Elves will get to be Paladins. But anyway, there is another data mined leak, and that leak could be the next raid. So Midnight's got all the classics. You've got Silvermoon remade, Magister's Terrace returning, fun shenanigans in Murder Row, you've got the Sunwell. It's all fun stuff about elves and their relationship to the light, but also the void. You see, Voidstorm feels a lot like Netherstorm. Voidscar Arena is even full of ogres. And I said all of this to make the point that it's big Burning Crusade vibes. But there's one WoW tradition that data miners just found evidence for, and it's one that's been in almost every expansion since vanilla. So here is the first clue. It's Warlock tier set icons that are labeled Ulatek. Now, in the Warcraft RPG, Ulatek is the name of a serpent goddess, one worshipped by the Zalaman trolls. Now, with that in mind, take a look at this image, where we see a hidden island off the coast of Zalaman. Previously, it was called the Isle of Fangs. Of course, if you think about fangs, you do think about snakes, which does tie all of this together. And to make that even more overt, a recent alpha build has renamed it to Atal Utek, which should mean something, if you translate it, like Shrine of Utek. So Utek, Ulatek, close enough. Basically, looks like our first patch could be a troll raid, or maybe one of our minor patches could be us doing things over in that island. Now, of course, as a serpent goddess, we could maybe think about other serpentine things like, say, the Naga, and bring them in. And with that, we'd really be in TBC remake territory. Obviously, we need some Draenei stuff. So Blizzard, please, just give me more Draenei in general. But that does make me wonder if the Prophet Velen will have anything to do with the Sunwell, given that he is the one who infused it with Inaru's light, and it is the infusing of the Sunwell with that light that's kind of exposed it to this big threat from Xal'atath. Okay, the console news, we gotta talk about that too. So, speaking of our future, there's been one question dominating headlines, and that is WoW coming to consoles? Are they dumbing down the game and removing add-ons so that WoW can be on an Xbox? You've seen the headlines everywhere, likely, and the answer is actually way more complicated than that. So, to start, here's what's actually happening. The next Xbox is going to be a PC. Much like the current Xbox ROG Ally, which is a handheld Windows PC with a console-like interface that's basically a collab between Asus and Microsoft. And of course, it's something that you can play World of Warcraft on, because it's just a Windows PC. Now, of course, when you do, you'll find a game that's very obviously not optimized for console in terms of its UI. But to be a bit reductive, the Xbox ROG Ally, and the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck for that matter, are gaming PCs. World of Warcraft runs on them, but they're also framed as consoles, so does that mean that WoW is a console game? The answer is not really. I mean, maybe if Midnight does really well, then Xbox would push WoW to be a bit more controller-friendly without add-ons. That would let them, advertise it as a big Xbox title, but honestly, I think for the foreseeable future, this won't change anything for World of Warcraft at all. We know that Xbox's main priority right now is profit margin, and that means to Blizzard that making sure Midnight and player housing keep WoW nice and healthy is much more important than any sort of big risky thing like this. More important than risking, your whole game for a wider audience. And as for the headlines about it coming to Xbox, I mean, yes, that's literally true in a world where the next Xbox is just a PC that Microsoft makes that's designed to go under your television. So at least for now, it's not time for the alarm bells, and that is actually it for the news this week, but I've actually got a good little thing for you, and that is that if you want to know more about how Blizzard are basically repairing the Shadowlands stuff, well, there was a new PTR build. We saw a whole bunch of stuff in that. It's really interesting, and you can learn all about it in this video next.